difficulties, we will continue to have this board meeting as best we can. So prior to our technical difficulties, we called the meeting to order. Just for the minutes, that was around 9:35. We now have reconvened and are reviewing our draft board meeting minutes from January. Ms. Galladay has just asked that we correct the spelling in her name throughout the document. So making a note of that.
What should the spelling be, please?
It has
holiday.
one L.
It's like holiday, but with a G. It just has two L. Yeah, it should just
one L.
Yes.
One L. Okay.
Yes.
Thank you. I'm sorry. Thank you.
Problem.
Right. And then I just need a motion to accept the minutes with that correction, unless there are more corrections.
Make a motion to accept the minutes as corrected.
I'll second motion for.
Okay, good morning. The motion to accept the minutes has been made and seconded. Any comments? All right, all those in favor of accepting the minutes with a verbal aye? I'll do the roll call. I need to do the roll call. That's right. That's the other thing we have to do. Ms. Galladay?
Aye.
Ms. McGrady?
Aye.
Dr. View?
Aye.
Mr. Rice? You're muted.
Aye.
Thank you. Mr. Hoyt?
Aye.
Ms. Lingo?
Aye.
Mr. Carlos?
Aye.
Ms. Freelander?
Aye.
All right, the motion passes. The minutes have been accepted. Now moving on to the next item on the agenda is a finance report. So we want to call Bill in.
We have called Bill in.
All right.
Bill is here now.
Awesome. Good morning, Bill. As he connects to audio, I guess we should wait for him.
Mm-hmm.
Good morning, Bill.
Morning.
Turning the mic over to you for the financial report.
Okay. Well, good morning, everyone. I have to start out by telling you that I had written up my financial report, and yesterday Hoyt had read it, and we had our finance committee meeting, and he said to me, "Are you going to read that tomorrow?" He said, "It's kind of sterile." So then I go,
It was a good read.
but no, it gets worse than that for me. So I tell my wife that, and she said, "Let me read it." She was not nearly as nice as you were.
I don't have to live with you, Bill.
Anyways, I have tried to revise it a little bit, and primarily for my, I have the financials, I have the financials for January, and they're there for your review. And if you have any questions on them, that's fine. But for our discussion, what I wanted to do is focus on our year-end forecast and also talk a little bit about the budgeting for this coming school year. I don't know, are there any questions as far as the financials, the year-to-date January ones?
Bill, it might be helpful just to do like a 2-minute overview of the January.
Oh, sure. Okay. I'm going to share my screen. And okay, what can you all see that? Okay, good.
Yes.
What we have is the year-to-date through January of our actuals versus the budget. And as you can see, from an income point of view, we're pretty much on budget. And primarily, the per pupil is ahead of budget, which I think is more just how I set up the calendarization of the per pupil because we're going to end up being behind it. Our federal entitlements, it looks like we're behind budget. That's because I have not submitted the reimbursement requests yet. And for the other things, private grants and donations, we're running behind. Overall, we're about on budget for income. For expenses, as you can see, where our expenses are less than budget. And I don't want to talk about this right now. I'll get to it when I get into the forecast and a little bit of the discussion that I have. But as you can see right now, we are tracking ahead of budget. And that is our income statement year to date. Are there any questions concerning it? Okay. I'm going to go to the balance sheet. Okay. On the board is our balance sheet. And as you can see, we have a strong balance sheet right now. Our current assets are good. Our total assets are good. Our cash is ahead of last year, which is what you would expect considering some of the factors associated with what has happened over the last year. And, overall, everything looks good. Our receivables are down because I haven't put in the grant reimbursement requests yet. Any questions on the balance sheet? Okay. So anyways, before I put up the forecast, I just wanted to talk a little bit to set the stage for the discussion. Because normally, when we talk about financial reports, we're talking about a specific fiscal year. And when we view them, we do. And there's usually, there's a budget which we present. That's our plan. And we usually can give you the variances between what we actually did and what the budget is. And, at the end of the year, we close the books and that year's done. We put it aside and we start the new year. And we go through the same process. And, I say that because it works very well, because the factors that we're talking about change from year to year. The drivers, the enrollment, the staffing, the grants, the programs that we're going to have. We know what that is, or we plan for it and we put it in accordingly. And then, as I said, we discuss any variances. But now we're dealing with a unique situation. Since March, things have changed. If you remember, last year at this time when I gave my report, I was telling you how good we were doing. We were ahead, Stokes Kitchen was ahead, aftercare was ahead, everything looked rosy. And I thought we'd have a good year. In hindsight, considering all that happened, we had a good year. We really did. The final number didn't look that way. A $500,000 deficit looks awful, but it's really a paper deficit. But anyways, and I thought by this year, as we're planning for this new budget, it would be back to business as usual. I never thought we'd be in the same position that we are right now. But we are, and it's going to make it harder as we get into the budget process. But anyways, I say this because the budget we have for this year was one that we had no idea what we were doing. If you remember, and purposely what we did was we budgeted a break even, keep your fingers crossed and hope you break even. So we put in all the contingency expenses to match whatever income we had. And, and we did that. And one of the factors that we budgeted for was the PPP loan that we received. Now that loan is still sitting on the books, and it's designed so that you can request forgiveness for the loan. And just to give you a background, December, BB&T told us you can go ahead, submit the application. Went through, submitted the application. The feedback we got, when I put it in, I thought we had 100% forgiveness. And we had a little bit of a cushion. I thought we were fine. I made a mistake. One of the things was kicked out. So we ended up where we would have missed 50,000 of the total forgiveness. Their suggestion was take it back, reopen the loan and resubmit it later after they get new guidance from the government. We actually, I guess Erica sent me the email today saying that they have that and that we, in I guess a couple of weeks, we can start the application again. I'm saying we're gonna get 100% of that forgiveness. Come hell or high water, we're gonna do that. But anyways, I want to keep that in mind. I'm going to put it over here. Once we get that forgiveness, that's going to be income. That $1.4 million is going to flow through onto the income statement. So how the timing of that forgiveness is going to impact our financials either this year or next year. So I'm keeping that in mind. I'm trying to read from my revised copy of my report. So anyway, I'm going to go now. I'm going to share the screen to show you the forecast. I'm like I said, I'm trying to set the stage. And here we go. Okay, can everyone see that? This is my projection for the year. Now, as I'm doing this projection, I'm leaving out the PPP loan because I'm trying to focus what I would call apples to apples. This is what we've done so far this year without the PPP loan. As you can see, our budget, we budgeted break even at $3,000. And as we go through this, if you look, our per pupil, I'm projecting we're going to be less than budget. And that's because our enrollment was down from what we had budgeted, and on the upside, I'm projecting that we're going to be about 65,000 over budget in our federal grants. This is the entitlement grants, the IDA, the ESSA grant, and also a SOAR grant that we have. These are the grants that we actually have now that we have the approval for that I'm going to start spending down on. My assumption is we're going to spend the whole thing down in this fiscal year. Also included in that, we're in the middle of a Medicaid audit. And that Medicaid audit usually brings in additional income. I'm figuring we're going to get about 50K of additional income from that. So I added that. So that's where we get to the income numbers. I'm also, Stokes Kitchen is right about on budget. We have one school and they're doing about what we had budgeted. That was good. National School Lunch Program, we're actually going to come in over budget on that. So overall, if you look at this, it looks like, oh my God, our income is $1.5 million less than what we had projected, but in that income was that PPP loan, which you see the huge variance in other income. So, okay. Then we get to expenses. For expenses, it's hard for me to say where we're under budget on all expenses because when we budgeted a lot of contingencies, not knowing where we end up. But the good news at the end of the day, it looks like we're going to have a deficit of about 81K. And that could go either way, plus or minus. That every day something changes a little. But overall, fingers crossed, I think we're doing pretty well. I'm actually surprised by how well it looks without that PPP loan. So with that, we have the 81K, and we can move into what, our next year's budget and the factors that weighing in on that. I don't have the budget done. We're starting to work on it, but the factors we're looking at is a decrease in enrollment. That's across the board. Some folks will go somewhere else if they're going to be in school more than us. We're looking at finding and paying for additional space and hiring more staff to run the proposed hybrid model. We're going to have a summer program. So all these are factors that will increase the cost. So, as we're going through this, it's going to be a very interesting budget we're going to do. Now, there's a lot of variables, and we're not really sure how to do it. But at the end of the day, what we have going for us is that PPP loan. And what I'm trying to say is we have to look at it not so much in the normal accounting way of per school year. We also have to look at it as a pandemic, what we need to do to get through this pandemic. And I'm hoping that, I'm hoping by the end of this school year, it's going to be over, that it's going to end sometime this year. But, we're really looking at, we could have 3 or 4 different educational scenarios that we go through during this coming year. So it's going to be, I guess what I'm saying is it's going to be a wild ride. So I just want to make sure I hit all my things. Yeah. So
Couple of clarifying questions, Bill.
Sure. Yeah.
One is, can you remind us what the PPP loan covers? Like, where is it going to hit in which categories? And then I want to just also make sure the summer is budgeted in this year, or does it fall in next year?
Our fiscal year starts July 1st.
Okay.
So that's going to end up in the next fiscal year. The PPP loan will hit you'll see that as other income. That's a $1.4 million. So that's going to offset some of our expenses. And the other thing, and there's other positive, there's other funding sources that we're probably going to be able to, we are going to be able to get. The one, and I'm going to read you the name of it because it is the Coronavirus Response and Relief Supplemental Appropriations and Elementary and Secondary School Emergency Relief Fund.
Yes.
But that's, I think we have about 400K that we're allotted for that. So, it's going to be a really wild year, but there are going to be other sources of funds for us to get through it. And that's pretty much what I have to say. We're going to do all our financial reporting the way we normally do. But till the end of this pandemic, we also have to look at some of these costs as going, if we end up with a big surplus this year, some of that surplus we're going to have to say is going to be part of next year's deficit, to offset the deficit from next year.
So, PPP covers salaries. Are there any other things that it can cover? I'm just trying to make sense of when that loan money comes in as income, it can be applied to salaries. And is there anything else?
It was set up, it was based on our salaries. I think that's how they decide the amount. The forgiveness goes a little bit beyond that. But once we have that income, it's just income. It's not a restricted source of funds saying you can only use it here, which wouldn't be hard to do anyways. So
Okay.
it's not.
And then the 400,000, which is coming through relief, which I think goes direct to LEAs. Is that right, Erica?
Mhm.
Well, you can apply that broadly because it's for
Yes,
recovery in
it's
the
for
pandemic.
recovery. Yep,
Okay, great.
yep.
That will be income on the books. Gotcha.
That income, if it's set up like the normal ones, is going to end up being, it's really an offset when you look at some of these, because we have to show how we spent the money before they give it to us. So it's good to say it's income, but it's income unless it's set up differently. But like our IDA grant or the ESSA grant, we only get that when we spend the money. So, are there any other questions?
I don't have a question, Bill, but I'll definitely would like to comment that I think that Bill is being very modest when he uses euphemisms like they don't know what it's going to look like, and there's a lot of gray on the horizon. So I think that Bill and Eric are doing an excellent job in terms of trying to manage all the uncertainty that's coming in this school year. And I think they put a lot of work toward it. And I just wanted to kind of make that known, because those are the kind of things that I see and I kind of look for when the finance committee meets.
Thanks. I have a question along that, and fully appreciate everything is uncertain, but based on the level of uncertainty that we've had and the ways that we've needed to pivot over the last year, going into this next year, is there anything that you think that we may need? I know you just mentioned the one new appropriation that would be coming in. Are there any monies coming in with the new legislation that was just passed? Sort of what, in an attempt to try to be proactive as opposed to reactionary, and appreciating that uncertainty will breed some of that, but based on this last year of experience that we have, what kind of things do you feel like we need? I guess it's both for Bill and Eric and for the finance committee. What should we be thinking about? What do we need? Are there other avenues for funding beyond the one act you already mentioned, Bill?
Yes. You want me to answer, Bill? So the couple of funds that Bill mentioned, the ESSER for short, ESSER 2 at $450,000. That's the one that he mentioned, but there's also an ESSER 3 coming, which should be at least that amount. I've heard larger amounts thrown around, but it should be a substantial amount of money. There's also the public school reopening fund from the city that is like an incentive to get schools, charter schools, to have in-person attendance. And that one is not as large, but it's like a $50,000 base and then $2,000 additional dollars per student that's in-house. So potentially, another $100,000. And then we've also received already CARES 1 Act funding, but there's CARES 2 funding coming as well that we'll have access to. So those are the sources that I know of from, government sources. Last year, we were also able to access a few sources through like the Charter School Growth Fund and Education Forward and some other organizations that we work with to support us in our virtual learning. And I know there's also a push to support schools in reopening and recovery. So I would suspect that there will be funding to support that as well. But just in response to that question, yes, there are other funds that we know about that should be substantial to help us do a lot of the things that we're going to have to do that Bill kind of alluded to, like bring in more staffing. Because if we have to continue social distancing, that means we have to spread out more. That means we need more space and we need more staff to occupy that space. So we're going to have a lot of expenses that we would not normally have that we're hoping is like a leap of faith. We're hoping that all of these funds that are either we have information about or we know that they're coming will be able to cover all of these additional expenses.
Erica, do you want to go to your executive report? Are there any other questions that are specifically for the finance committee or the financial report? Because
I
some
have
of
a
these will be
comment.
tied up into. Sure.
Yeah, just a really quick comment, and this is just about process with the development of the budget. Generally, in March, the board gets a draft of the budget, I believe, just to look over and think about and talk about, and the budget is usually approved in May. And obviously you don't have that draft in March. And I just want to make note of that because I suspect that there will be need for a call meeting of some sort to go over that so that we can get it completed by May, if in fact it still needs to be submitted this year in May.
Yes, that's a great point. So board members, we should expect that we may get a call meeting for April or early May, just so we can align with the budget that reacts to reality. Thank you for that, Ms. Moore.
It's a good way of putting it, reality.
Any other specific questions to the financial report? All right, I'd love to move to the next item on the agenda so Erica can walk us through some of these things that are connected. Thank you, Bill.
Thank you, Bill. Have a good weekend.
You too.
So yes, I wanted to go into a little bit more detail about the planning that Bill described in his budget presentation, but just also kind of as a marker, we were talking earlier in the meeting about the fact that this date, March 13th, last year was the last time that we were in school as a group of people. And since then, we've been trying to figure out our way back. And our plan, we have a re-entry plan and kind of a recovery plan that we are putting together and adjusting as we go along. And as we are thinking about re-entry and recovery, it's like in the Washington Post piece that I forwarded to you guys, where I was quoted saying it's a very delicate balancing act because we have to take into account the concerns of our families and our students, and also take into concern the well-being of our staff. And there's some staff and parents who are ready to come back to school now. They've been ready for months, and there's some staff and parents that still need to stay at home for some very valid reasons. And so what we're trying to do with our re-entry is to design a plan that allows us to operate as safely as we can, and serve as many scholars and staff to the best of our ability within the constraints that we have right now. So we know that as a school, Stokes is always guided by mission and core values, and it's the same thing with our replanning or re-entry and recovery efforts. We are also looking at the current climate of schools around DC, particularly public charter schools. As we plan, we're looking at what other schools are doing and what kind of structures they have within their schools to help inform our planning process. And as of the 5th of March, I think that was last week, within the charter school sector, there were 4 hybrid model schools operating, meaning that schools had groups of students in at least 4 days a week learning in person, while others were learning at home. There are 5 hybrid adult charter schools operating. There are 61 charter school campuses that are virtual, or they have limited, very small numbers of high priority students that they're serving in-house. There are 15 schools that are operating virtually and have learning hubs. And these are like the DCPS Cares classrooms where they are, students are learning virtually in-house. They're supervised by an adult, but they are still engaged in virtual learning. And then the 43% of charter schools are in a fully virtual mode right now. So they don't have any in-person attendance at all. So there's a range across the board. But when we look at our sister language immersion schools, Yuying, DC Bilingual, Mundo Verde, LAM, we see that they have similar re-entry and reopening plans to ours. They either have small groups of high priority students in-house that they're serving. That's DC Bilingual, whereas Yuying is operating an ABV hybrid model where they have one group of students in-house one week, one group another week, and the third week is all virtual. So it's kind of across the board. With our educational recovery plan, we expect that it could take anywhere from 2 to 5 years to recover completely. The part of the plan that we're working on right now covers the period from January through August of 2021. Then, as Bill mentioned earlier, we have a summer school session planned for this summer in July. And then we're also planning for school year 21-22, what that re-entry will look like. Our priorities as we plan for this period of time, this January through August period, for the last couple of weeks, we have had groups of students in-house, and we've administered the NWEA testing to kind of get an idea of where our 3rd through 5th graders are in terms of their performance and achievement. In less than 10 days, we have a small cohort of high priority students coming into both campuses where they will be learning in-house full-time, 5 days a week. We believe that the PARCC testing for this year will be waived, that we will not have to administer it. OSSI has applied for a waiver, and we believe that we're operating under the assumption that the waiver will be accepted. So we're actually most likely not going to do the PARCC testing this year, which is not a bad thing. Another high priority is taking all the data that we've collected over the course of the school year to help to develop targeted and school-wide interventions for our students. Our plan is to incrementally increase the number of students in the building over the course of the next several months. We know that we will need to make adjustments to everything from curricula, assessment schedules, and some events as we are planning for the new school year. And when we get back into the building next school year, we are going to emphasize social emotional wellness for the first 6 weeks of school, because everyone has experienced trauma in some form or fashion. Our summer school program will take place from July 6th through July 30th. We'll have both an in-school and a virtual option, because again, there's still some parents who do not want to send their children into the buildings, but we still need to be able to provide a quality virtual option for them. The focus on the in-school and the virtual program will be to build community among students and staff, help us all get reacclimated to school. For the rising kindergarten through fifth graders, as well as the graduating fifth graders, they'll have 1 week in-house per grade band. And then our pre-K students will have outdoor community building activities throughout the month of July. For our virtual program, we'll have academic interventions for selected students, and then we'll also have an opportunity for students to engage in enrichment. Any questions so far?
No?
Okay. Rodney? Oh, that was a no?
Yes, yes, no.
Yes, no. Yes, that was a no. Thank you, Rodney. So our re-entry process, again, as we are making decisions about how, when to come back into the building, we're looking at criteria like health indicators, the availability of vaccinations for our staff, trying to figure out the space constraints that we've been referring to, how we're going to manage that. Again, we also know that we need to hire additional staff as we go back into the building. So our progression back into the building is we're trying to make this a logical progression rather than strictly time bound. We do have a timeline associated with our progression, but we want to make sure that criteria is in place that will allow us to have the most successful re-entry as possible. We continue to look at our local and national climate in terms of what other schools and school systems are doing. And again, as we plan, we want to be able to make sure that we have both quality in-person and quality virtual options for our students and staff.
Question, Erica. Can you explain what the additional staff will do, or what the additional need is? And then I don't know if you plan to just at least talk a little bit about the town hall with community and sort of what the messages were there. I want to make sure board members understand what the demand from the school community is, and sort of what concerns, how you've been able to address them, which I think most of them have been addressed quite beautifully.
Yep. So in terms of the staffing, the reason that we need to have additional staff is because of social distancing requirements. Right now, the DC Department of Health guidelines for re-entry into buildings, classrooms, requires that all of the students and staff are at least 6 feet away from each other, and that right now a maximum of 12 and occasionally 13 people maximum in one classroom space. So our issue is an issue, and this is especially pertinent at the Brooklyn campus, where our classrooms are really small. We can only get so many. For example, in our, let's say our kindergarten classroom at Brooklyn, I think we can get 7 kids in the classroom with 1 adult. That means that if there are additional kindergarten kids who need to be there, they'll need to be in either 1 or 2 more classrooms. And so the more spaces we need, the more adults we will need in order to take care of those kids. It's tricky. We have been looking in anticipation, and I'll get to this actually in this slide, but in our planning for next year, we have multiple different scenarios of what our reentry could look like, ranging from everything is back to normal, we don't have to socially distance, Everybody can go into the building. There are no maximum number of people. There's not a cap to the number of people who can get into a room, to a scenario where there are 6 feet apart or we are 3 feet apart. And in those scenarios, we're going to need some extra classroom space. So we've been looking at the possibility of bringing modular units onto the campus to provide some space on the grounds, spillover space. We've been looking at, last week we went to look at 3 different buildings that are built out as schools and have actual classroom space to rent out. But yeah, that is a very complicated process, and we, just going back to the funding that we were talking about earlier, we hope and are taking a leap of faith that the amount of funding that we receive will be able to cover the additional staffing and space that we will need if we need it. So the other, Heather, you wanted me to address some of the concerns from parents and how we've addressed those concerns. Okay.
The full community, because I think one of the things that's so complex about this challenge is that, as Erica just described, there are really specific outlines from the city on health and distancing, et cetera. Some parents are clamoring to come back in person. Some parents are electing to stay at home for their own health concerns, and their academic needs to address. And then there are staff needs to address. So I really want to try and underscore the level of complexity that the school leadership team is dealing with. At the town hall, there was an opportunity to hear from families, but I also know Erica is thinking about the staffing needs who have also experienced trauma and who have the exact same public health concerns. So we did have a town hall. I thought it went well. I was able to attend. I don't know if other board members were attend, but I think, like Erica, you telling people how that went and what you were able to walk away with in terms of support and engagement would be helpful.
It was, I think there were some very good takeaways from that meeting. There were also some parents, it's a minority of parents, but there are some parents who are very frustrated with the process and are really encouraging us very strongly to get back into the school buildings. There are some who would like for us to get back in full-time now. And at the same time, so there was some of that frustration expressed in the town hall, but there were also parents who, expressed an appreciation for the thought process that has gone into our recovery plan. There are also parents who shared that they are not ready to come back into the buildings. There were parents who asked how they could help with the process, and in response to that, we were planning to do this even before the town hall, but we were able to share in the town hall that we were going to set up parent reentry committees where parents could give feedback on, give suggestions and feedback on our plan. And both of our campus directors, who will be presenting right after me, can go into some detail about those meetings, because there are a couple that have already taken place with families. There were families who asked about communication and the regularity and kind of cadence of communication about the reopening from school administration to families. And so in response to that, we've done a couple of things. Our campus directors are joining the PTA meetings every month to give updates. We have also it's not live yet, but on our website, we have a kind of a reopening portal where all of the information that we've shared so far, letters, updates, recordings of town halls, timelines for our reentry will be housed, so parents can have one place to go to if they have questions about reentry. Let's see, there were families and staff who had comments and concerns about vaccinations. The staff, and I completely understand why, don't want to necessarily, there are several people on staff who don't want to return to the building until they're fully vaccinated. But we are in the process of making that happen. Actually, right now, there are a lot, I would say by this time, maybe 30%, possibly more of our staff have been vaccinated, a few of them fully vaccinated. And so there are also people on staff who are ready to come back into the buildings and are not going to get vaccinated. So there was a range of topics that we discussed and tried to respond to in the town meeting. Was there anything else significant? I think there was a question about special ed services and how that has been going. The Department of Education and OSSI have given certain flexibilities with special ed, given the constraints of the pandemic, and also given the fact that a lot of the special ed service providers aren't necessarily willing to provide in-person services. So a lot of services have been online. We will be giving compensatory services once we get back into the buildings. There are a few children who have actually had some evaluations in person on campus, but that was another topic of discussion. I think that's the gist of it, Heather. You remember anybody else? Ms. Moore, you were there. Anybody else remember anything?
I don't remember anything else, but I really strongly recommend that anybody who was not able to attend the town meeting get the link to it. I don't know. I assume you can give them the link to it, Erica?
It's on the website. There's,
okay.
Yeah.
There was a lot. There was just a lot that came out in the town meeting. And if you really want to go in depth, that's probably the best way to do it. There were a lot of feelings and opinions that were expressed. And I can't say that one perspective was any stronger than the other, but everybody felt very strongly about whatever it is that they felt, whatever their opinion was.
I just have a question about whether or not there was some consistency across the set of parents that were adamant about getting back into the building. Are their kids of a certain grade level or a certain composition? You know, I mean, where's their consistency among those parents and their kids and what their concerns were?
I would say that the parents of the younger students, I think this whole process has been difficult on everyone, but the parents of pre-K students, because it's hard for them they can't access virtual learning without their parent support. So the parents are, working full time and they're homeschooling full time, supervising the little kids in the way that the older ones don't necessarily have to be supervised. So I think that would be one consistent kind of characteristic. I would say, I would estimate that maybe that's about 15 to 20% of the school population, or at least the ones who have been most vocal. That's the percentage of, the estimate. When we've surveyed parents, I think the most recent information we got back was our intent to enroll survey. If I recall correctly, about half of the parents were okay with, virtual or hybrid. There was a smaller percentage, obviously maybe 15, 20, who, were ready to go back in person. Others, the rest were okay with the hybrid model. So I think there is still, I would estimate that the majority of parents, there's still some hesitancy on getting back into buildings. But there are some who want to be there now. So we're trying to, walk that balance, because we also have to get the teachers back in, right? For the students, if we want to be able to run the kind of in-person model that we are planning for, it requires teachers. And so some of the teachers have some medical concerns and legitimately need to kind of stay back. Some have concerns about members of their households. So there are some teachers that are ready to move forward, but we've got to make sure that we have coverage across the grade spans that we are planning to get back in-house. So it's this between our instructional leadership team and their planning efforts, our teachers, and just hanging in there with the virtual learning, our operations people who have been working nonstop to get the buildings ready with materials and supplies and all of our protocols in place, and all of the different trainings that parents and students and staff will have to have in order to get back into the building. And at the same time, looking for additional building space, and at the same time recruiting for staffing above and over and above what we normally need. It is a major task. It's a major task, and my hat goes off to the entire staff for even kind of sticking in and trying to work their way through it.
And I think we'll be talking about that in a little bit later too, but I want to make sure I understood one thing that I thought I heard you say, that there are some teachers who are willing to go back in the building but are not getting vaccinated or willing to be vaccinated. Did I understand that correctly? And what does that mean?
There are a few people who, for various reasons, are not getting vaccinated. They have different reasons, and they are legitimate reasons. So some of those people may not be able to come back into the building. Some of them may, if enough of us are vaccinated. We're all going to be, even when we're in the building, we will be practicing social distancing. We're required to wear masks. There's actually, for both staff and families, there is kind of a code of conduct agreement that we're all going to have to sign, stating that we will adhere to certain protocols in order to make sure that we are as safe as we possibly can be.
Could I add that what is going on in the building now with the testing does not look like anything that most of us have ever seen in schools now, because everybody is masked. There are face shields for teachers. There are shields, I think, around the desk or tables for students, and there are gowns for teachers to wear. So in some ways, it looks like something out of a science fiction story or television show. It it is extraordinarily complicated, and our curriculum complicates it even more in terms of staffing, because to teach children in small pods in a language immersion program really means that in some instances, you probably almost have to have double the number of bodies instructional bodies that you have now. And that's the challenge. I may be overstating the twice as many, but that's how I've calculated it.
So it's not just, yeah, it's that, and then we also have to have people to relieve staff. It is a lot of work. It is a lot of work. So I've fast forwarded to some of pictures of some of the classrooms that Ms. Moore just mentioned, and how they've been marked up for social distancing. This is our Brooklyn campus. And if you look, yes.
I had a question for you. Two questions, really. One, do you anticipate any challenges in being able to acquire new staff, given that I would assume, especially given that I would assume a number of the other schools are under the same kind of social distancing requirements and will probably need additional staff too.
Yep.
The second question is really kind of a part 1B is, does that additional staff include, does that, with that additional staff, include staff at the network level, at least for some period of time, to help navigate through the obvious additional requirements on your resources and bill resources?
Both very good questions. We anticipate having problems getting staff. It is going to be a challenge, particularly if we need target language people, because it's easier to get Spanish instructional staff, not as easy to get those who speak French. But we are, we are reviewing resumes, and we are going to be participating in virtual recruitment fairs, and we've got ads out in several places, and so we are working to get the staff that we need. It's tricky, Carlos, because we won't know. I'm sorry, Hoyt. I was looking at Carlos, and I said,
I'm better looking than Carlos.
I know. I know. Sorry. I know y'all aren't the same. You are not the same person, but
just like business school. I'm Carlos.
Oh, let's not start. Let's not start.
We're not really going to know exactly what staffing model we need until we are sure about the social distancing requirements. So, whenever that comes, and that may come sooner than, it may come soon, because I know that there is a push from several different directions, a push from some school leaders, a push from parents, and I believe a push from some government officials to reduce the distancing from 6 feet to 3 feet. And so if we can, all be in one building, then it will be easier because we won't need as many staff members. But one thing is dependent on the other. And so what we're trying to do is look at as many options as we possibly can. And that includes the kind of the facilities, just what is it that we have available to us. We don't want things to slip from under our hands, because I know for a fact that other schools are looking for space as well. So yeah, it's tricky.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm. Other questions? Okay, I will go back. Let's see. Just a quick overview of the timeline again, because I think we've talked in one way or another about a few of those slides. But as I mentioned before, in a couple of weeks, just under 2 weeks, we're bringing back groups of high priority students into the building. Late April, we'll be bringing back pre-K and possibly K, depending on the number of staff we can get to come in. We have the summer program that we mentioned before, and then 2021, we'll have some form of one of our multiple scenarios, plan A, plan B, plan C, D, E, F, or G, depending on all the factors that we have discussed. This is a very kind of slide is a very complicated sample of what a potential schedule could look like for next year for our pre-K and K classes, just to give you an idea. It's a 4-week schedule. Half the time kids are at home, half the time at school. For our Brooklyn campus, this is an even more complicated schedule of our 1st through 5th grade. These are 6-week bands where kids would be in 3 weeks and out 3 weeks. Just some very quick, I've talked about some of these operational updates, but just as an FYI, this school year we have distributed over 500 computers and devices to staff and students. We continue the weekly distribution of food to families, as well as distribution of instructional materials to school students. We're looking, as I mentioned, at potentially leasing additional classroom spaces next year. We're in the process of preparing both of the buildings for reopening, and next week we'll have an all-staff training on mandatory health protocols. We've seen these. I have a quick video. Our operations team has done videos, a series of videos for families and staff to help students kind of understand what processes they'll be going through when they get back into the buildings. And if I can just quickly play one of these, I'd like for you to see what they're doing. Can you hear the audio? You can't hear the audio?
I can't hear it.
Okay.
I can't hear it.
Okay, all right. Well, I thought that I activated the audio, but basically I mean, you can see that the child is walking into her little square, and she's got her one bucket where she keeps all of her materials. They don't mix and mingle with other students. So yeah, it'll be a very different way of returning to school when we get back. But again, these are our current constraints. So this is what we are working with. Just an update, I mentioned earlier about the fact that we are getting more and more people within the school are getting vaccinated. Now all teachers and staff in schools are eligible for vaccines, as opposed to about a month ago. So we anticipate that within the next month or two, everybody who wants to be vaccinated will be fully vaccinated. So, any questions?
Eric, I have a question, and I'm sorry if you covered it earlier. I assume that any staff who comes back into the building is doing so voluntarily. And in terms of just thinking about just from a liability standpoint, which unfortunately we have to think about as well. Yeah. You know, are we having staff sort of acknowledge that I'm just thinking about liability to the school if someone were to ultimately get sick.
Yeah. So we have talked to our insurance broker about the liability issue, and we are increasing liability. The feedback from the broker is that it would be challenging for someone to pinpoint, infection, the origin at the school, but we are increasing our liability in the case that we are sued. Also, I'm sorry, I forgot your first question. What was your first question?
If people were coming, if staff who were coming back into the building or work were doing that voluntarily,
People
and
are
somehow acknowledging that fact
yes.
to be helpful in the liability standpoint.
That's it. People are coming back voluntarily. We are not forcing anyone to come back at the moment. We have not actually, that's one thing that we had not thought about, having staff acknowledge, formally that they're coming back voluntarily, but we can add that to any one of the forms that we have them completing. That's a good point. But yeah, at some point, we have to, at some point, if we do not have enough staff coming back into the building and we're trying to move forward with, bringing more kids into the building, we will have to make decisions about, there are some people who are covered by ADA and can need to stay home. Other people who are scared to come into the building. What we're trying to do is demonstrate to them that we have put all of these measures in place, that we are trying to mitigate any risks. If they see their colleagues coming in and, being comfortable with the process, that we won't get to the point where we have to have conversations about voluntary or involuntary return. But it's a tricky piece.
No, definitely. I'm happy to have a conversation with some of my colleagues internally on just some of the best practices for employers bringing folks back in this environment and things that they can do. So I can touch base with you on that later.
I would appreciate that. Thank you, Erica.
Sure.
And I know, Erica, too, there's some schools that have some kind of app that all employees and students have to check in when they come to the school, because that way the health authorities can trace if someone does come down with COVID-19, then they can do the contact tracing.
Yeah.
So you have all that, yeah.
Yeah, we are actually right now, the way that we're checking people in who come into the building, it's through a Google form, because there are not lots of people coming in, but next school year, we're going to be using an app to do the check-ins, because you are absolutely right. It takes some of the administrative burden off of us, and we need to relieve as much as possible. Yeah.
Erica, what kind of app are you using? I know that a number of schools are using something called a Magnus app currently.
Yeah, Tracy, you would ask me the name of the app. I will look it up. I have it in my email.
No worries. You don't need to give it to me now. I was just curious if it was going to be the Magnus app as well.
I don't think so. I don't think it's the Magnus app. That one doesn't ring a bell.
Okay. Well, if you need any
concerns about it, Tracy?
No, I just think that it's an app that a lot of
it's a good one.
Yeah, well, a lot of our schools have been using them here and I believe in DC as well. It's a lot of stress for parents because, if you don't fill it out every single morning, any of these apps, every school has a different policy. But, for example, where my son attends school, if you miss it twice at all, your kid is unable to return to school, right? So there also have to be some sort of policies around the app. So if you miss filling it in so many times, how that's going to affect the child's ability to attend school and whether or not they'll have to have a test, et cetera. So happy to help though, Erica, in any way that you need. moving
Thank you. I
forward.
appreciate that. And I will look at Magnus. I know that our operations director looked at 3 or 4 different apps, but settled on one that seemed to be best suited for us. But we can also, we haven't signed the paperwork yet because we're not starting until next school year. So we can still look at a couple of others.
Yeah, there's something called Safety App that some schools in Baltimore are using.
Okay. Thank you, Rodney.
You're welcome.
Eric, I'll just add that DCI is using an app as well. Something along the line with, it sounded like something along the line what Tracy had described about parents checking in.
Okay.
Yeah, there's a COVID screener. If anybody knows, like if there's some differentiating information, so if you see an app that you think works really well, if you can forward that to Erica, because if they're happy with the one they chose, there are probably some reasons, but I would love if folks have like quality information about one over the other. If you're experiencing one, that would be helpful information. Any final questions for Erica, just so we can move forward on the agenda? I don't want to cut off discussion because this is really important, but I also know we're about 25 minutes behind.
Okay, well, thank you very much. And Kareem is actually waiting in the waiting room, so I will let him in. And Bobby should be joining us shortly.
And you may notice that we just switched the order on the agenda, so Erica could proceed. Erica, I'm not entirely sure about the full content, but can we ask the campus directors to tell us half of what they planned?
Yep.
Okay. Good morning, Mr. Kareem. I thought you might have heard that.
Yeah, I'll talk fast. I'll talk fast. Don't worry. I'll pull out the Geechee Gullah way to talk.
Okay.
Do that real quick now.
Welcome.
Let me go first because Bobby don't know how to cut down the way he talks.
You're on.
All right, great.
Thank you. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you. I want to start with a video clip.
Bienvenue dans Kindergarten French. Aujourd'hui, c'est notre fête. Répétez après nous, s'il vous plaît. Je suis important. Je suis conscient. Je suis lecteur. Je suis chercheur. Je suis écrivain. Je suis passeur. Je suis brave. Je suis unique. Je suis gentil. Je suis preneur de risques. Je suis respecté. Je suis un mathématicien. Je suis spécial. Je suis autonome. Je suis extraordinaire. Je suis différent. Je suis artiste. Je suis précieux. Je suis une superstar. C'est qu'ils sont. Merci beaucoup.
So the reason I wanted to share that is because I feel like it does a great job of encapsulating a lot of the work of the school, but there are 3 features in particular that I wanted to highlight. The first is the importance of the arts. The second is the growing depth of understanding around the International Baccalaureate program. And third, the high quality of our early childhood education program. So I want to focus a little bit on those 3 things real quick. So throughout this past year, one of the things that I have stayed most excited about is the fact that we have maintained, at the very least maintained, if not increased, our commitment to children as human beings. All right. One of the things that I've been highlighting in a lot of my interactions is the fact that the UN Declaration of Human Rights recognizes access to culture as a fundamental human right, right? And our arts program has continued to provide a cultural context to children's learning and allows them access to yet another means of communication in addition to English and French and English and Spanish and mathematics, right? So these are all ways that students are able to interact with the culture, not just around them in this city, but then also around the world. That video also highlights our sustained commitment to the IB program, which was fully authorized in this past year. The children, staff, and families are beginning to recognize and use the vocabulary associated with the learner profile. And in addition, the school has already begun preparing for the 5-year review and has forged ahead with the development of discipline-specific units of inquiry in physical education and health, and in the visual arts and in the performing arts. Thirdly, we have begun work on applying for recognition as a program of distinction with the Middle States Reaccreditation Program. There are a few areas of distinction in particular that we're really excited about. One of them being our arts program, and the other, one of the others being our early childhood education program. The work that our pre-K and kindergarten staff have done over the past year is nothing less than remarkable, especially considering the fact that they are working with children at a distance and still providing a level of program that parents have repeatedly reached out to express their great thanks for. Children are able to do this at a stage of development where they are not yet fully comfortable with letters and numbers as symbols of information. And so the fact that we've been able to carry out this high quality early childhood education program over in the virtual space is something that I'm just overwhelmed with appreciation for our pre-K and kindergarten staff. So those are really kind of the high level areas of just really great appreciation for the team that I wanted to make sure I brought to the attention of the board. So with the strangeness of trying to do early childhood education over a virtual format, this leads me directly to a conversation about reentry. So in addition to the high praise that I wanted to give to the instructional staff, I wanted to take a moment to highlight the incredible work of our operational staff. The operations staff has worked determinedly to research, compile, and implement mitigation strategies that we believe are going to substantially reduce risk for children and staff as we re-enter over the next several months. We will begin with a small group of students on the 22nd of March and will continue through the fall. At East End, the operations team has made preparations to support an initial group of 24 scholars in 4 cohorts from pre-K through 2nd grade. These 24 scholars were identified by our student services team, our student support team, as the children with who were the highest at risk for academic loss. And so they worked to help me send out invitations to those scholars from highest to lowest risk within each of those grade bands. So we sent out 43 invitations to fill those 24 spots. So there are a couple of things that come to attention there. One is that there's a high percentage of our initial invitations to families that were declined. And what this means to me is that some of our highest needs students are committed to a virtual format for at least the next 3 to 6 months. What that means for us is we must maintain a high quality virtual offering for our families while we continue to plan for in-person work. Secondly, staffing and access for families to in-person work are both social justice issues. Staff must be able to serve the scholars, but they also must know that their own humanity is respected both in terms of their health and their time. Virtual teaching is harder than in-person teaching, and it requires quite a bit more time to prepare for virtual work. That pales in comparison to the amount of time that is required for preparing for teaching in both the in-person and virtual formats at the same time, right? So across the country, every educator that I've spoken to who is involved in a format where they are both teaching live to students in person and to students in a virtual setting at the same time, they report having the highest stress levels. And so I absolutely urge that we not ever put ourselves into a situation where we are planning for teachers to do that, all right? Teaching virtually obviously has less infection risk than teaching in person, but there's no doubt that we are going to have to be working towards in-person teaching and learning rapidly. These polls are a conundrum that we have not yet entirely solved. Cold political or economic expediency might indicate that the path forward would be to simply tell our staff and our families that we are going back into the building full stop without respect to concerns about health from either our staff or from some of our families who are not yet ready to come back into the building. But I believe that would be a failure of mission. We are the Elsie Whitlow Stokes Community Freedom Public Charter School, and we are mission driven towards a stance of both social justice and community service. There are other school districts in the country who have pushed staff to go back into the building, and it has resulted in acrimony on all sides. I would argue strongly against any actions that would put us not just at odds, but in direct conflict with any of our fundamental constituencies. And in the face of all this, with the staffing concerns that are brought to the fore in this, there is of course budgeting concerns that come on top of that. In several conversations with Ms. Bryant, she has spoken of the need of a leap for faith in respect to the upcoming budget. This leap of faith is easy for me to make because I have complete faith in the leadership and the character of the person who has asked that of me. I want to take this moment to urge the board to give your faith to Ms. Bryant and to Mr. Machogodowski in terms of the budgeting cycle that is coming up. Because of the work that she has been able to spearhead over the past year, includes the distribution of literally tons of produce to not just our school community, but the wider local community in Ward 7 and 8, in addition to the thousands of hot meals that were able to be distributed to the wider community. All of that in addition to the food service program run directly through the school for our school community, right? And so these are just a quick way of noting the ways that we've been able to be of real service to the community, and that I feel like we should continue. This commitment to justice is also evident amongst our parent community. The parent equity team continues to expand its influence across the community, now on both campuses. They have held several fora on racial justice and gender equity. In addition, the PTA at East End has re-engaged the question of their style of governance. with the dues paying requirement of membership being one of several factors under consideration with the decision between PTA or PTO. One final note about parent involvement is the work in the work of the school has to do with over the past month. Both Bobby and I have met with parent and staff reentry advisory boards on each campus. Parents and staff have already begun to assist us with the crafting of surveys and the dissemination of digestible information amongst the parent community. At East End, we are excited about the continued growth of the school community and our partnership in the civic life of Ward 7. We've been able to be active participants in the Northeast Boundary Citizens Association, the 7C Advisory Neighborhood Commission, the Ward 7 Education Council, and the Ward 7 COVID-19 Response Task Force. We have been of real service to the community, and we are ready to serve yet another grade level next year. I thank you for your time and for your continued faith in me as a leader of part of this work. And I'm available for any questions either now or after Bobby has had a chance to do his presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Kareem. Mr. Bobby, I'm going to throw to you and offer you the challenge that Mr. Kareem did his entire report in 12 minutes. And then board members, we will follow up with some question time for both campus directors.
You know, quite honestly, Kareem could have spoken for both of us. We work very closely together. So I can just really just drop the mic here and just take questions, but I will go ahead and you know, do my piece in less than, I'll try to do it in less than half of that. So I don't know what has been said already, but I do want to start off on, let's see if I can, my apologies. Trying to read, okay. So 1 year ago, you know, 1 year ago today, to the date, we left our building with the intention of returning in 2 weeks. And 1 year later, we're still in the midst of this pandemic, global pandemic at that, you know. We haven't seen children, you know, in a year. The classes haven't been filled in a year, but there's been a lot of work, and I think Kareem touched on a lot of that. There's been a lot of work that's been going on behind the scenes. And I want to, before I talk about challenges, I just want to talk about some of the wins. And again, my apologies if some of this has already been stated. But I want to tip my hats off to the entire operations team under the leadership of Ms. Cortez. Throughout this pandemic, this kitchen has prepared meals and continues to feed our family, you know, throughout the pandemic. We have partnered with organizations such as Mary House and of course Martha's Table in the East End to supplement meals and housing for some of our families in greatest needs. The maintenance crew has been preparing the building for re-entry, especially, you know, like in the last couple of weeks we had student testing, so they've been preparing the school for re-entry for the March cohort and for the April re-entry of the pre-K and K students. The front office staff, they've been creating tools essentially to make it possible for us to re-enter into the building, like making videos, creating procedures for re-entry, like the health screening of the Google Docs, creating safe procedures while we're in the building. And, you know, and all this you know, on top of continuing to do their regular administrative duties, like registering students for the fall and, you know, matriculation and health, you know, everything that they do, they have to do all this on top of that. I want to send a shout out to our data department, Ms. Julia. Under her leadership, you know, we were able to test approximately 50% of our K-5 students over the last 2 weeks. And again, it's working all together that, you know, we were able to make this happen. Our instructional leadership team, Ms. Constanza and Maribel especially, I cannot say enough about their leadership. and they just work tirelessly to provide support for teachers, to provide supports for students, to problem solve, to troubleshoot, to, you know, and they're like machines. They're nonstop. And I really appreciate working, you know, with Maribel and Constanza. They're the directors of teaching and learning, and they're doing an amazing job. And I can't say enough about them. And again, so they're doing all this now, but they're still preparing for, you know, the April cohort. They're preparing for the summer. They're preparing for the fall. What is it going to look like? And they're lucky for me. They're very, they pay very close attention to detail. And I'll get into that a little later. But, you know, we had prepared a schedule, and, you know, they're like, where are the bathroom breaks? And I'm like, what do you mean bathroom breaks? I thought a break was a break. It's like, no. So when this pod goes to the bathroom, you know, maintenance has to come behind and sanitize the bathroom, and then the next pod can come to the bathroom. You can't, you know, so it's so many details to just having, you know, 20 students in the building in March. Also, our student support team, I want to give a shout out to our student support team. They meet with teachers every single day. They respond to families' needs that arise. They respond to tech issues. They, you know, if there's some type of support that needs counseling service, you know, they're on it. They ensure that students not only receive academic support, but they ensure that, you know, the social emotional well-being of our students and their families are, you know, if they can't help, they try to provide resources for those families and those students. I also want to give a shout out to Ms. Carolyn Hutton. She's our communications person. Yes, I know today that we had some technical difficulties with streaming, you know, live on YouTube. However, she was able to communicate that she sent you know, within minutes, she was able to communicate that with the entire community. She sent out something on the listserv saying, hey, sorry, you know, we are having communications. You know, communications right now, it isn't perfect. But under her leadership, we're definitely on the right path. And we continue to improve it every day. And on a funny note, you know, I told her, I'm like, yeah, I gave her a compliment. I'm like, you know, Ms. Hutton, you are the dopest communication person that we've ever had. And she was like, just so happy to hear that, because she says she's never been the dopest anything, has ever been referred to the dopest anything. But she's also our beekeeper. So we have about 70,000 bees at Stokes at the Brooklyn campus. So she's also a dope beekeeper. And Kareem spoke about this a little earlier. So many of our parents have asked how they can help, you know, and so we created like a parent/staff reentry advisory group. The group meets every other week at least. I mean, like last week I met on Saturday, I met with some of the communication folks on that team. But you know, they're helping us with communications, they're helping us with the survey, they're helping us. We have one parent on there who's a real estate person who has just been an absolute gem. This week we visited a couple of spaces. The spaces, you know, unfortunately are a little bit bigger than what we need, but we're trying to see if we can partner with a couple of, you know, other schools or another school, because a lot of schools are looking for spaces in the fall, because they're trying to open. You know, they're trying to open too, but they need the space and the staff. Kareem and I have also been in communication with the Urban Adventure Squad. Urban Adventure Squad, they're one of our current partners who, it's an organization that provides outdoor education and field trips. And we're hoping that they can provide some outdoor experiences for our students, either on a weekly basis or a bi-weekly basis. One of the things we did notice during testing is that the kids, some of them seemed very nervous coming in the building. Some of them were very nervous. You know, there's a procedure coming into the building. So some of them were very nervous, but many of the kids were just absolutely excited to be back in the building and see some of their friends, to take a test. So imagine how they're going to feel if we can get them back to the building to do like a field trip, even if it's for an hour or 2 hours, you know, to get them out into to do a field trip. So we're working with Urban Adventure Squad to hopefully, start that within the next, sometime in the spring, in the 3rd trimester. So with all of these wins, there's still some monumental challenges in opening, and I'm not going to go too far into it. Kareem, I think, said it, like he said it very well. The, staffing continues to be a challenge. Just to bring in 21 students, which we're doing on March 22nd, into the Brooklyn campus, it's been really difficult. Like there's a lot of curveballs that, that go into it. So, we have like a class of, let's say, I think we can fit up to around 6 students per class. But now some of those students, they have like a one-on-one aide. So we have to provide a one-on-one aide, which now takes away the space of another student. And it's also another person we have to staff to be with that student. So in one class, we have 2 one-on-ones, and we have to have a 3rd person. So in that class, that we were able to fit only 5 students with 3 adults. And it seemed very, like it seems like a lot of like resources for 5 students. But legally, we have to provide the one-on-ones to those students, which is a challenge. I spoke also about like all the details that go into just the day. We have a schedule, so we have some of the staff. So let's say we have four classrooms, right? So those staff, they need a break. However, I can't be the one to go into this pod and give them a break, and then go into this pod and give them a break, and then go into this pod, because let's say if I get contaminated, or if I contaminate somebody else, now all the pods might have to shut down. So we have to assign 1 person per pod to give that break. So we have some backups that will be working in administrative offices to relieve, there will be assigned to that pod alone while they're teaching. So it'll be like a teacher assistant working in the building, in a location. Then when they'll be providing breaks and stuff like that when they are not teaching. Let's see. So we still don't have a nurse assigned to our school. We had to move the nurse out of the nurse's suite, and we have to have 2 isolation rooms. So the 2 pre-K rooms behind the stage, those are being used as the nurse's suite and the isolation room. We're waiting on the Department of Health to approve our temporary health suite, which is with one of the pre-K classrooms. So hopefully this week we'll get approved, and we will have a nurse by the time the students arrive next week. Also, speaking of the Department of Health, we receive weekly updates on students that who are out of compliance, who haven't been, vaccinated fully. And then we send out letters to all the parents. The downside is the department, I get weekly updates. So the downside is that it hasn't changed in several weeks. Like in about a month and a half, it had I still keep getting the same report. And I'm like, hey, I know it's been updated, so why hasn't, we've sent you all the updates, so why hasn't it been updated? So it's kind of puts us between a rock and a hard place between Department of Health and following the proper protocol, and parents, because if parents says, hey, I gave you my child's immunizations, but Department of Health says you cannot let anybody in the building without proper immunization, and you have to go by this list, then it kind of puts the school in between a rock and a hard place. So hopefully, I've been reaching out to the Department of Health, and hopefully we get that rectified soon. So yeah,
Bobby,
so
these examples are really illustrative, and I hope that board members heard again just the level of complexity that our school leadership team is challenged by, but also their depth of commitment. I want to make sure there are 5 minutes for any questions that you might have for campus directors.
I had a quick question. This can go to either Bobby or Kareem. Can you just briefly describe how we took attendance before we switched over to virtual learning and how we're taking attendance now?
Yes, attendance was done in the classroom by teachers, by just noting the students who were in the building. And then either one of the teachers would input that into FileMaker Pro on their computer, which is our data collection program in the building. During virtual learning, teachers have still used FileMaker Pro to input attendance, and what they do is a student is counted as present if they engage in one of the online learning platforms, that being either a live class or one of the assigned work products through one of the platforms like Zern or Seesaw or Google Classroom, something like that. And that learning platform could be either in one of the core classrooms or in the specials classrooms, or if they participated in a small group that is indicated by the child's IEP. So those were the ways that students could be present, by participating in the virtual learning program in one of those ways. Students would be noted as absent excused if there were things like a tech outage, or with some of our families, an electrical outage at one of their at their home, which is a real thing for some of our families. They lost power during the school day. So that's how attendance was kept. That, of course, it's detailed in the plan that the school filed with OSSE about our attendance plan during the pandemic.
Thank you.
Erica, did you want to get in?
Because I unmuted myself. Is that why?
I'm
No, I was.
confused.
If there are no other questions, I just wanted to thank Bobby and Kareem, because they're both brilliant. This, as you've heard us all say, has not been an easy lift at all. And everybody on our team has just been, I mean, we have our moments, each of us, when we break down a little bit, but we have been all in this, and it's evident, by Bobby and Kareem's reports. I think it was very good to hear that we're all on the same page and that we're all on the same plan. And to thank them both immensely.
Yeah, I do. I want to second that, because I think this work is so hard. Carlos?
Yeah, I was going to say the same thing, Heather. I apologize. My computer crashed shortly after Mr. Bobby started. So I think I got the gist of his challenges, but also if it was in accord with Mr. Kareem's strategic focus, I'm sure everything was aligned. But I just wanted to say, it is great to see two men of color leading such fine institutions. I think if we're looking for positive news to put out there, this is a story the Stokes schools should consider in a PR stance, that you have two men of color who are leading through these challenges and still seeing the success. And
working under a woman of color.
And continue to work under some dynamic women of color, and just women in general, who's given us all some great leadership. But that's just the flow down that goes unnoticed, but sometimes it needs to be noticed. But the real results, we see it in our young leaders. So I just wanted to say, I commend both of them for the leadership that they get to exude onto all involved staff and students. And so if there is a PR effort out there, I think this is one that we could capitalize on in ways to help with some of the other initiatives as well. Especially when you tell them Mr. Ewing went to Morehouse College.
You know, I wasn't going to say anything. The computer went out when the Howard man was speaking, but you were able to hear the full Morehouse man. But you know, I'm not. I'll let Hoyt, you know, jump in on that.
So we know who went
Bobby,
first,
Bobby, you know
Bobby,
how much known for
went
being
first.
very charitable. So let's extend the charity to our less fortunate brothers. Okay.
But now
we got the vice presidency, so we'll let you take that.
Right.
Oh,
I'm sorry, I didn't hear you, Bobby. Did you say that again?
No, I said we got the vice presidency, so we'll let them have their moment.
Oh yeah, it came. I heard you then. I heard you.
It took y'all long enough. We've been there a while. But
oh my goodness. Last comment, Carlos, for this section of the agenda.
All jokes aside, you guys are doing a phenomenal job, and I do think it should be highly recognized if we can, because you don't see it often that you have men of color leading primary schools. You know, we're always challenged to go off and do other things for various reasons, and the commitments that they've made to the school and to the community. I think it's a great story that we should really consider highlighting more publicly, if not only within the Stokes communities.
I agree.
As well.
Miss Bryant, we can work on that. I agree.
Yeah.
Okay, any other questions from the board for the campus director or the executive director reports? All right. So our next agenda item, we're going to close session to hear back the report from the education board education board partners who we've engaged to help us do a self-assessment of the board's efficiency and productivity. And so we'll go to closed session for that.
Okay, I will, let's see.
And yes, thank both of you for your reports. We appreciate your time, and you definitely lifted our day.
Thank you, gentlemen. Have a good weekend.
Thank you. Have a good weekend. Enjoy the rest of Women's History Month. And don't forget to leap forward. You got to change. Now with smartphones, it happens automatically, but you know, you might have to change the microwave. Yes.
Thank you for your service, board members. Y'all have a wonderful weekend.
Bye.
You too. Thanks again.
Okay, so I'm going to stop this recording and